Hello, it's getting closer to the month of April and I barely have any time to record, especially in English language, about ASD awareness and ASD acceptance. Since now it's my spring break, I decided to record one, at least video, just about everything in general that I want to share with you guys about ASD. Because there are a lot of myths that are going on about Asperger's or ASD and a lot of misconceptions, and I probably will start with some of them. Misconception number one is that ASD is necessarily related to intellectual disability. That's a different misconception. A lot, if not most of ASD1 diagnosed individuals, those that had been diagnosed with Asperger's before it disappeared from DSM-5, according to the diagnosis itself, need to have either normal or above normal IQ, so that's a different definite misconception. So let's move on to number two. It's about a lack of empathy and about emotional disadvantages of people with ASD. That's a myth also because there are two different types of empathy, and one is intellectual empathy and the second one is actual physical or bodily reactions in connection with emotions that is a result of some other person's suffering, let's say, or some other person's types of emotions, positive or negative. So people with ASD at times are not capable of differentiating between these emotions, but they are able to feel it. So they are able to not only sympathize, but also be compassionate towards them, which is the second part of empathy. So there is a huge link between empathy and compassion, or understanding on a physical level of emotion of another person. The difficulty with people who have ASD condition, or like I would prefer it's called a condition rather than a disorder, but we can talk about that in another video or maybe later if I have enough time. So having said that, so it's another misconception is lack of empathy. So another interesting perspective is the perspective of inclusion. Very often, and it's very popular right now, to talk about acceptance of ASD by mentioning the necessity of including ASD people into neurotypical world. This is a huge misconception, and especially for those who make political statement about education that we cannot segregate or separate ASD and neurotypical people in our schools. Why do I call it misconception? Because it's all about the conditions. I also call autism a neurological condition or neurological difference rather than neurological disability. So basically, it's a processing difference, and it requires necessary conditions for perfect functioning of an individual with this condition. So if the condition and the requirements are met, the individual with this difference can function perfectly well. And if our conditions are not met and requirements are not there, then individual doesn't have enough energy, because the energy goes towards fighting the stimuli that are out there and that are not favorable to the person with ASD. So basically, if we're talking about inclusion, we need to make sure that this is an inclusion on the terms that are favorable to people with neurological condition, to people with ASD. What is favorable to those people? Well, first of all, of course, all physical stimuli need to be reduced to a bare minimum. Let's say fluorescent light, all background noise and sound needs to be basically it needs to be minimized, or preferably to be not there for ASD people to function well. Communication needs to be done in a different manner, in a way, so a person with an ASD is not capable of multitasking at all whatsoever, for various reasons. And the person with ASD is not capable of filtering information. So basically, any information that's out there, any sensory, any intellectual, any verbal, any information is being processed at the same time all the time, and it's extremely draining. So if there is a conversation that's going on in the room, and that's a conversation between several people at the same time, a person with ASD would not be able to distinguish between two different dialogues that are going on within a group, and would get very, very confused, and to the extent that he or she won't be able to filter or even listen or even hear what's going on. So it's basically almost like the radio is not working well, although the listening or actually audio abilities of the person with ASD are really... So basically the hearing is very good. It's either normal or above normal. But that's not about the hearing, it's about the processing. It's about the brain. It's also not about the sight, it's about the processing. So very often autistic or SP people have beautiful, wonderful, perfect sight, or not, but that does not depend. The processing information does not depend on the sight, but a lot of it depends on this part of the brain where the motion is being processed, visual motion. So everything that's moving is processed differently than anything that's static. So if you are taking your eyes, looking at the static object or letter or picture, and your eyes can process it very well or see it very well, it's not the same as a moving object, because people with ASD process movement slower and very often don't really notice some of the subtle movements, sub-movements. And that's why very often there is another misconception that ASD people or like ASPs, they're not able to process facial expression, or like they don't understand facial expression. Very often they do understand facial expressions pretty well if they are in a form of a picture, of a static picture. But yet when the person is in the room, ASPs might not be able to understand that facial expression, not because they can't actually understand, but because they didn't see it, because they didn't have enough time to actually see it. So they don't really, it's not there, it didn't come because they didn't have enough time to process the visual information. And another thing that I probably want to share in order to wrap up already is that An important thing is not to talk about inclusion that is on neurotypical conditions. That's not the type of inclusion SPs would want or care for. But what SPs would probably really benefit from, as well as the whole neurotypical world, is more education, and neurotypical people need to be educated as much as SPs about the way SPs function, because SPs function very, very differently, but it does not mean that they don't function well. So given proper conditions, they can function immensely well. And one thing that really is a difficulty for an SP is the change from one activity to the other, because that's when the actual energy is being that's where the energy goes. So to make a concept, to come up with the structure. So when you are already in the mode of you realized how that activity is going to look, then you can concentrate on the activity for a longer period of time and be very sensitive to details, detail-oriented, be very specific, capable of very tedious, very precise work for longer periods of time. But the problem or the difficulty is actually in the switch between different activities. While people with ADHD, as well as neurotypical people, that's quite the opposite. They need to switch from one activity to the other, or like even they need to multitask because that's what they do. So for us to be able to cooperate well and understand the whole variety of people, we need to educate ourselves, educate each other, and not only tolerate the differences, but also learn a lot about the differences. And that's the only way for us to be able to work together well. And that's a good thing, because very often our society needs each and every individual. We all are extremely talented, but we all need to learn each other's differences. So I wish you all the best. I hope to talk to you very, very soon. Everyone who's new to my channel, please like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell, as well as leave any comments you want, and I will keep in touch with you. Bye bye for now.